I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Angela.
We are the Ink Mages. Join us as we discuss all things fantasy, world building, storycraft, myths and legends, and of course, our own imaginative stories.
We are so excited to have you part of our very first podcast episode. We're really excited. We are super nerds when it comes to fantasy, and we're authors, we're writers, and we love storycraft. And this is going to be a podcast where we get the opportunity to really nerd out and just really break down the writing process. We'll be interviewing other fantasy authors, as well as just discussing the different parts of building worlds and crafting our stories. So we're really excited to have you along for the show. Welcome. We just really want to introduce ourselves and help you get to know us and who we are as the Ink Mages. Hey, Stephanie, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about you?
Well, my name's Stephanie Cotta, and I live in beautiful Southern Oregon. I am an epic fantasy writer. I've been writing fantasy for about 10 years now. I have a published book called The Conjurer's Curse, which debuted in December of last year. And the sequel, The Race of Argent, is coming out this December of 2023. I am a huge nerd. Like Angela said, I love Lord of the Rings. I'm a Star Wars geek. I have read probably over 100 Star Wars books. So that is really what inspired me to start writing, was reading a bunch of Star Wars, reading The Hobbit, Narnia when I was a kid. I am just totally saturated in the world of fantasy. And I know you, Angela, you are a big Arthurian legend nerd. So tell us a little bit about what inspires you and just your writing in general.
Well, I'm currently in Waco, Texas. I have 2 children and a wonderful husband. And I, like Stephanie said, love Arthurian legend. I love mythology just on a whole. I love Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, which is really what really captured my interest in Arthurian legend. I can't get enough of it. Something about stories that seem like they're a true part of history, and in some ways they are. And then the whole part of why stories just last through the ages. I think that's why, just like you, I love J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, I think that was probably it was C.S. Lewis and George MacDonald and then J.R.R. Tolkien that really made me fall in love with reading in the first place. I think I read J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings once a year for like 10 years.
Oh my gosh, you're better. You're better than me, because I didn't even. This is really sad, but I didn't know what Lord of the Rings was until the movie came out when I was 14 or 15. It was pretty much just Star Wars until then, and then I was hooked.
Well, I actually can't say really previous, but definitely, being a child of the 80s, Star Wars was my first love. I mean, I've definitely had my fair share of Star Wars toys, and I never got into the books. Now that I know you, I'm far more interested in picking up those books and reading them. But I was really captured by a Lord of the Rings. I don't know. It was something about that. I remember when the movies were first coming out. I think I was 20 when I found out the movies were coming out.
Oh my.
And I knew 2 years before. And I was telling all my friends, I'm like, oh my gosh, the movies are coming out, Lord of the Rings. I was so excited. And nobody knew what I was talking about. They're like, what is Lord of the Rings? Lo and behold, it's taken over, the whole world. And now everybody knows Lord of the Rings. But I definitely, and I think I watched the first movie at least 12 times in the movie theater. So I'm,
wow. I think I saw it twice.
It's embarrassing to admit. What was that?
We saw it. I saw it twice in theaters, but the first time was Christmas. It was on Christmas Day.
Oh, yes.
Our family had never done that before, but my brother was like, "No, we need to go see Fellowship of the Ring." And when it ended, I was shocked. Like, wait, what? I was one of those confused people.
Yeah,
yes. The ending, I didn't understand that you could, there was more to go. There was more to the story.
I know. I remember telling all of my friends, I'm like, don't worry. This is just the first third of the books. And I have to say, even knowing where the story was going to go, it was an adventure watching the movies for the first time. And I think that's the whole thing. Like stories are so amazing how they capture us and inspire us and make us want to. And that's what I loved about J.R. Tolkien. So he made me believe there was something beyond the books. There was something beyond just the story that was on the page. And that's what Myth and Legends does. And I now have my own book series now. I just finished writing book 3. It's not published yet, but I have 2 books published of the Once and Future Chronicles trilogy. And Once and Future, I like to let people know because they're like, why Once and Future? That's actual super nerdy tagline from Arthurian legend itself about the
Yes.
potential return of King Arthur. So that is the series that I am writing on right now. And I just super love the process. I actually met Stephanie, speaking of, why we're doing this podcast together. I met her as I was being brave enough to write my first book. And she was the one to really help me navigate storytelling and what it took to really develop my story and get it ready. So you guys be just prepared. She's got a lot of really good nuggets. She's really helped me learn as a writer and learn how to build my world and really be inspired by another writer, to be honest. Her Conjurer's Curse series, actually one of many of her stories. I've read a few of them that are still, in the wings. I can't wait for them to come to the world.
One day they'll see the light of day.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it
But
is
the
so
magical
important.
world building that are in those books is just incredibly inspiring.
Oh, thank you. And I'm inspired by your own myths and legends that you have in your Arthurian legend stories. So that's what usually captivates me and just pulls me into your world is the fact that you've embedded it with the myths of Arthur and Merlin and songs that have been inspired by the ballads, from Celtic myth. That I'm like, I just love the richness. That's for the magic. That's the magic of
Right.
our stories. So
That's exactly what we really want to talk about today is that how does the magic happen? How does that story go from our imaginations to the page? How does that story come to life for us? So, Stephanie, how does the magic happen for you?
yes. So one of the most common questions I get from people is, how do you create a world solely from your imagination? And I have writers too who write nonfiction or stuff that takes place in our world, and they don't get it. How can you craft something out of nothing that exists? And I think it's natural for me because of growing up reading Star Wars and then later Lord of the Rings. These are stories that they don't take place in our world, but there are characters who are realistic that we can learn from and just really like and understand their conflict and the struggles that they're going with. So I would say how the magic really happens is you get an idea. And so for my stories, it was dreams. I had a dream that I had one night, and there was these characters and they were talking, and one was a shapeshifter and another one was a noblewoman, and they meet in this forest, and the shapeshifter needs her help to save his people. And I'm like, what is this? And from there, the story was birthed. And I've written 7 books in this series. They're not published yet, but The Conjurer's Curse takes place in the same world. So it all was birthed from a dream. And I tell people, if you have an idea or, don't discount the dreams you have, because an entire story can just stem from one line. And with The Conjurer's Curse, it was an experience I had. And this thought of what would happen if a 17-year-old albino was cursed to kill people around him. I'm like, just that thought. I went home and I wrote an entire first chapter just with that concept. So the magic happens with an idea. And what I like to tell people is that as a writer, I basically get to stay home and make believe all day. And I love that.
Yep, I have actually stolen that line from you, and I've used it in a few interviews because when you said that, I remember I can't remember what conversation we were having, but you said that, and it so resonated with me. I was like, that's exactly what it is. That's almost the magic is, and that's why I keep repeating it because it's so right on. It's this game of pretend almost where, if you were a child that liked to play pretend and you would imagine these worlds and you let them kind of take you for a ride, you started with
Mhm.
this idea, we're going to play this, or we're going to be this character, and we're going to be in this forest, and we're going to do this thing. And then you play, and
Yes.
this world begins to develop. And in the way of writing, which to me is completely magical, you're not only getting to develop these worlds like you did as a child, but they're lasting worlds that you get to share with other people. And it really is kind of trusting. I feel like I don't know what you think, Stephanie, but kind of the magic is being able to trust the leading of the story without questioning it constantly. What do you think?
Yes. Yeah, because your characters will take on a life of their own, and sometimes they wanna do something in a direction that you thought the story would go elsewhere, but it as a writer, a lot of it is just, I have an idea and I'm gonna start and kind of see where the story develops. So, I even told this to my publisher, I think, like, last year, is that I do feel like I'm making magic because I don't know where things come from sometimes. It can be you just drive and a character starts talking to you, and now all of a sudden you have a whole scene mapped out, and you had no idea what you were gonna write when you opened your laptop, but you were open to it, and the characters talked, which I know can sound really weird.
It's
But
kind
they
of like
do
the man
sometimes.
who invented Christmas. That whole
Yes.
movie, I think it kind of delved into the insanity of authors a little bit. The characters that they see in their head and in their imagination, sometimes they're very real and alive while you're writing the book.
Yes. And I do love when they come and share what they wanna do because it gives more depth and realness to the character that they have a mind of their own. They have a voice of their own, and they want you to listen.
They do, and it's kind of, I mean, I think for all of you that are fantasy writers or those of you who love a good fantasy story, I think you kind of get this. There's got to be that place
Mhm.
where, like she said, your origins was a dream. But for some of us, it's even just being captured by a book that we've read or a movie that we've watched that will not let us go when we lay down at night and close our eyes. I think that some of the best stories started out as fan fiction. And then they
Yes.
morphed and changed and became our own stories. But for you, it was a dream. And I love that because even Stephen King, he's famous for saying that a lot of his books originated in dreams. I wouldn't want to have the kind of dreams Stephen King has.
No, and they scare me.
Yeah.
The concept, like, man, gosh, what is in his mind for him to come up with these elaborate tales? Yeah.
Speaking of some of the books that you have in the wings and having kind of more of that, horror concept, you have another book that you are currently you're in the publishing process with. Tell us
Yeah.
about that one a little bit.
So
The magic on that one.
I have a book out there that I started 5 years ago. Maybe it's 6 now, but it's called The Heartsmith, and there are some horror elements in there. So as you know, I love fantasy, but I also am a huge history buff, and I love historical fiction. And I've loved Dickens. Charles Dickens is he's a wonderful writer and a genius. So I love a lot of his stories. And so for this one, The Heartsmith, I really wanted to blend Oliver Twist with Frankenstein and put it in a
Ooh.
steampunk setting. So there are lots of those elements. It's kind of in a Victorian era. And then there is like a mad scientist out there who's experimenting on bodies. So there's cadavers, there's undead elements in there. So I'm not really a big horror person. I don't watch horror movies, so I'm not really sure like how I put why I wanted to put these elements in there, but it just kind of fit in this world that I crafted. So a little bit of my love of Star Wars shows through too, because I have airships and skyships, and energized weapons. So most of my books, I'm blending my love of fantasy and Star Wars and medieval style weaponry setting in there too.
How would you say like the magic kind of happened for this one? Because this one was different, right? This one didn't start with a dream. This one, you kind of, like you said, you kind of had these concepts and a love. Was that just, did you
Yes.
just follow the trail and let it lead you?
This one was, I was in a small writers group and we did a writing prompt. And the prompt was a character makes a decision that has negative consequences, which is really vague and kind of broad. And I think at the time I had been experimenting with an idea of writing a steampunk story because I think the style is really fun and imaginative. And so I wrote, I think, like the first chapter of this character who went to a metropolis city, who's an orphan and going to be a tinker. And he gets there and he's new, but he ends up making this split second decision to help in a situation where there's this feud going on. And it leads to a negative thing happening to him. So it's like doing the right thing it won't always lead to a good outcome. So that was kind of the gist. And then I sat on it for probably 5 years until there was a writing contest on writing a short story that's 7,500 words or less. And I do have a problem with brevity. So that was a stretch to keep it under. So that kind of inspired me to dig it out of the pile and look at it again. So I think I wrote 3 chapters, made it a little short story, and then sat on it again. And every once in a while I would just tinker with it. Here's my character as a tinker and I'm going to tinker with it, and kind of just slowly evolved. And eventually I was able to finish it only just last year. So some stories you can, write really fast. They come real fast. The Conjurer's Curse I wrote in 4 months and it was like done. This one's been a 6-year process.
And it's a fantastic story. I can't wait till it's ready to come out. It really is fascinating. And it's amazing. I think one of the things that for me in my process, I've recognized, like we're talking about the best game of pretend, there's all this magic and inspiration and fun in writing, but there's also the just being willing to put in the hard work and not give up, knowing that there's more to the story that needs to be told. And one of the things that has been a valuable lesson to me is that I still have the storytelling ability, even when I'm not feeling it.
Right.
Like there's times where it's like, I'm not feeling it, but I keep writing. And I know that there's a lot of people, and we'll discuss, themes, and we'll be discussing a lot of these elements like writer's block. What do we do when we feel like we can't get to the next part of the story? We'll definitely have other episodes on those subjects, but I feel like it's important to, it's like writing and anything creative is so emotionally driven. It's so like part of you as you're writing. You can't really separate yourself from it. But then there's times where it's like just you're pressing that story out. And I've noticed, believe it or not, some of my best chapters are written when I think I don't got it. Or when I think, I just didn't feel like writing that day, or I wasn't feeling super inspired, which to me is almost like contrary what you would think. You'd think you need this, huge magical inspiration all the time to get all the good nuggets. And I'm like, it kind of happens both ways.
Yeah.
It's kind of in that process of not giving up and surrendering, but continuing to like forge ahead because there's a story worth telling.
Yeah. There are days where it flows and days where you really are like working. You are digging in to get that, gold nugget out of the ground. And my process is a lot of times when I'm writing initially, it's just a skeleton. It's a bare bones concept of a scene. And I can go away that day thinking it's trash, like, oh, it's awful. But, you come back the next day with a better frame of mind, and you have to just have that mind of, I'm adding muscle today. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add dialogue tags. I'm going to add interactions. I'm going to get inside my character's head a little bit more and just pull out some threads that I have developed earlier in the story. And that's a lot of it's just reworking and reworking. And that's magic too. It's not always just instant on the page, the magic explodes. It can happen. And then there are days where it's like you really have to conjure the magic forth.
Well, and again, the Conjurer's Curse, which I can't wait. We're going to have an episode where we really get to break down our individual stories. But
Mhm.
even your character in the story, it doesn't just come easy. Like there's a magic that resides in one of your characters that does naturally occur. She begins to discover, but then there's the parts that take work, and it's still
Mhm.
magic.
Yes.
Like she is having to dive in and learn the different parts of how magic functions. And again, that's I think a huge part of writing is discovering that process that's bringing you through the story.